My mom did nothing wrong. We did everything we were supposed to do. I was always bringing doctor's notes, always calling the school to let them know that I was in the hospital.
Her teachers had her medical records from the Children's Hospital. I even had a 504 plan, which was an agreement between the school district and the parents to provide care for students with disabilities. My name is Cheree Peoples, and this is my story.
Hey everyone, this is Teresa from Base 10 Montessori, and today I want to talk about something a little bit different, mainly because I came across this story from Cheree Peoples that I found very interesting and also kind of mortifying. I'm a little shocked that in our modern day society, we would be treating children with disabilities in such an incredibly awful way. So that needs to be brought to people's attention. And also, we really do need to talk about what special education is. Today, I want to talk specifically about Section 504. And one of the reasons why I want to do that is because this doesn't get covered in our Montessori training. Even if you go to Montessori training and you are doing something with special education, the law doesn't get discussed. And based on what I saw of Cheree People's story, we need to talk about this because this really is amazing that this is still happening in our society, that we are discriminating against children with disabilities. And we need to be very careful of that. And we need to actually make sure that we're supporting parents and not punishing parents when their child has a disability. Cheree Peoples is a single mother. She has a daughter, Shayla, and her daughter has sickle cell anemia. And we're going to show a little bit more about what that's like in just a minute. But having this disease, having this illness, having this disability has caused her to miss a lot of days of school. And while she had a 504 plan with the school, it somehow still ended up not protecting her. Because of how the laws in California were passed, Shayla's mother, Cheree, ended up being arrested for truancy law violations. This means her daughter missed too many days of school. Now, when you have a medical condition, when you have a disability like that, the law is on the side of the student with the disability. It's not on the side of truancy laws. And this really actually disproportionately affected single mothers, especially Black single mothers. And these mothers were actually arrested for these truancy violations. Now, this is absolutely wrong. This is absolutely not what special education is all about. Special education, it's important to note that it's not just about how to teach children with disabilities. There is that aspect to it, right, where we learn techniques. And anybody who's taken these classes knows this. A lot of special education is about the law. What is the law regarding the rights of families and children with disabilities? What is your right to be educated? And so this is where we really need to talk about what the rights of families are, what the rights of mothers are, what the rights of children are when it comes to getting an education. And children with disabilities are guaranteed accommodations and modifications. Schools and communities must provide these services if they receive public funding. And this is where it can get tricky for Montessori schools because we have a lot of Montessori schools that don't receive public funding. But we still need to be aware of the law. We need to be aware of what's going on because it's important that we are supporting families who are having difficulties. If we punish families for their child having a disability, we are not serving anybody. And I think most of us as teachers, as educators out there, really want to support families and see them succeed and not punish them or kick them when they're down. So before we go much further, I really want to go back to the interview and give you a little bit more information on what happened in this story.
I am a single mother. I've worked as a certified nursing assistant and a caregiver. My lifestyle became taking care of her almost full time. Her whole life, she has been on medications like morphine and Dilaudid to help her control the pain. In addition, she had to undergo blood transfusions every 3 weeks.
So as you can see here, there is a very severe disability and it does require accommodations and modifications. It does require that the school do something to help the family meet the needs of the child in terms of education. And to be fair, it sounds like the school was doing that, right? So where did this go wrong? Where did this go wrong? Well, they passed some laws, some truancy laws in California. And the reason why they did that is because schools get money for when children attend school. So they were losing out on a lot of money because children were not showing up to school. So you have to know that every time something like this happens, when something as horrific as this happens, the root cause of that is probably money, right? But let's move forward and go into the actual arrest and what that looked like.
It was April 18th, 2013, in the morning. I'm in my pajamas. I had just fed my daughter, gave her medications, sent her off to school. Little did I know, there was a warrant out for my arrest. I opened up my door and 2 officers entered my home. They told me I was under arrest for my child missing school. So they take me outside for what you call a perp walk. Police even put out a press release naming me and other Black single mothers like Toya Daniels who got arrested the same day. Everyone knew most truant kids were Black. I think Kamala Harris wanted me as an example to threaten other single Black mothers, like, this can happen to you if you don't get your kids in class. I spent the next 2 years in court fighting these charges. Kamala assigned her nastiest prosecutors to my case.
My homicide prosecutors, my gang prosecutors. And they went over there and I said, when you go over there, look really mean.
They kept pressuring me to plead guilty and spend a year in jail, but I kept refusing because I did nothing wrong. All the time I had to spend going to court, I was struggling to care for my child. I lost my job and couldn't pay rent, and we got evicted.
During her trial, in that hospital stay was when I had my stroke.
I had a stroke about 4 or 5 days ago. Now I'm doing pretty good. My hand is doing okay, I guess.
In 2015, after 2 years, they finally just gave up and dismissed my case. In 2018, the Supreme Court of California ruled that truancy cannot be punished by incarceration.
So as you can see, obviously this was struck down. This was not legal, what they were doing, and she was able to go back to her life. But it took ruining her life to get to a point where her child could access education without being punished. And it's because of this idea that I really want to jump into this subject and talk a lot more about what is supposed to be happening in our schools when it comes to special education and doing modifications and accommodations. If you want to see all of this, I'll make sure to post the link to the video that I'm using today. I'll put that down in the comment section and make sure you have access to it, because there's a lot more there that I'm not covering that you really should go back and listen to. But for right now, let's jump into the part where we talk about the special education laws and what that means for us in our educational communities, whether we are public or private. Let's jump into what the law actually says, what the rights of families are, what the rights of children are when it comes to getting an education. And today I'm going to go back to my special education book that I had when I was working on my master's degree, and that is the Special Education New Horizons 2nd edition, published by Pearson, and the authors are Smith, Tyler, and Scow or Scow, I'm not sure. Anyways, this book had a lot of good resources about what the law actually is, what the rights are, what the differences are in some of these different laws. And I think it's a really good way to start to understand what's going on here. I need to go over some terminology before we go too much further into this video. Let's talk about federal laws and special education. There are some terminologies here, and we like to shorten them a lot, so I just want to make sure you know what they are before we go much further. So we have FAPE, FAPE, and that stands for Free and Appropriate Public Education. And then we have IDEA, which is Individuals with Disability Education Act. Then we have the ADA, which is Americans with Disabilities Act. So we have things like Section 504 and IDEA, and those laws protect the education of students with disabilities under federal law, and they do that in two different ways. So we're going to take a look at what those differences are. And then also, I'm going to point out that IDEA provides 6 educational guarantees, and we'll go through those. And then we're going to talk a lot more about Section 504, which provides accommodations and modifications for students learning when there is a disability. And that's really what we're going to get at when it comes to this video about Shayla's condition. And we're going to talk about accommodations versus modifications because these really are two different things. And this may help you in your classroom figure out, do you need a 504 plan? If you are a private institute and you don't receive any funding from the government, you might not need an official 504 plan, but it's good to understand what it is and know the difference between accommodations and modifications. And that way, it might really help your classroom flow a little bit better if you understand the process that public schools go through. So let's talk about Section 504 of the Rehabilitation Act of 1973. That's how far back this goes in American law. Section 504 protects the civil rights of individuals with disabilities of all ages and ensures that their needs are met. It prohibits discrimination against people with disabilities and applies to an entity that receives any kind of federal funding. Because public schools receive federal funding, they must adhere to Section 504 and therefore provide accommodations to students whose disabilities or conditions require some level of support. And if you remember at the beginning of the video, they talked about the fact that they had a Section 504 plan. And yet, even though they had all the plans, it sounds like the school was doing everything right. But it was the politicians, the lawmakers, that discriminated against children with disabilities. So it was actually the people passing laws and enforcing laws that didn't understand the rights of students with disabilities. So I don't want to go off on a tangent of blaming schools for not understanding this because really, actually, it sounds like the school understood what to do and they were accommodating that. But as usual, politics ruins everything, and people who get to the top of their careers in politics often don't understand the details and the needs of families and students. Let's talk a little bit more about IDEA. So in 1975, Congress passed the Education for All Handicapped Children Act. The initial goal was to ensure that students with disabilities received an individualized education with the least possible amount of segregation or isolation from their peers without disabilities. Over the past 4 decades, it's changed a little bit, and the law is now referred to as the Individuals with Disabilities Education Act, or IDEA. So implementing IDEA is different depending on the age. If you're under 3 years old, it's going to look a little bit different. So you're going to have an Individualized Family Service Plan, which is an IFSP, and that's different than the IEP. And your focus is really going to be on natural environments, home environments, right? Because they're so young, it's not going to be a strict, structured school setting that you are trying to accommodate. The other difference under 3 years old is the cost. So a lot of time that gets charged back to families or billed to insurance. And this is what really makes it difficult. My background before Montessori was early childhood, and so much of the time I really struggled to find resources and referrals for parents for children under 3 years old that was affordable for them. And that was a real difficult part of my job in that 0 to 3 age group. You know, when you think that there's something going on and you want to make a referral, it's really hard in that age group to do anything because the funding just really isn't there. Now let's take a look at ages 3 to 21. This is where you're going to get an individual education program or an IEP. This can be in the home setting, right? But most likely this is going to be more in a community setting like a public school. And there's not going to be the cost to families unless the families select certain options. So IDEA guarantees 6 things. The first thing is a free and appropriate public education, FAPE. And this is at no cost to parents. The second guarantee is an unbiased evaluation. And that's its own whole subject right there. I'm not going to dive into that, but just be aware of it. And of course, the IEP, which is an 8-step process. I'm not going to get into that today either. Number 4 is the least restrictive environment. And number 5 is something that I think our society is often forgetting these days, which is parent participation. The school must work with parents. They must inform parents. They must make sure that they have permission from parents. And then number 6, let's talk about procedural safeguards. So parents of each student with a disability are guaranteed certain rights. They need to be invited to all the meetings. They need to give permission for their child to be evaluated or allowed independent evaluations. They need to have access to educational records, and they are guaranteed mediation and due process to resolve conflicts. Now let's talk specifically about Section 504, because that is what was referred to in this particular video at the very beginning. They had this 504 provision plan, and it didn't seem to matter. The mother got arrested anyways. So let's talk about 504. And some students who have disabilities don't always require special education services, but they can still benefit from accommodations. And that's really what we're getting at here with Section 504. So let's talk about accommodations, and let's talk about how they differ from modifications. So when it comes to accommodations, we're going to change how a student accesses instructional content and demonstrates learning. Accommodations do not alter expectations or the amount of work the student must complete. So they're learning the same thing as their peers, but maybe they're going about it in a different way, and we'll go into some examples here in a little bit. Let's switch over to modifications. So modifications are different. Modifications change the instruction. It makes changes to the instruction, to the curriculum, or the assessments. They alter what the student is expected to learn or demonstrate. So that's a little bit different, right? Both modifications and accommodations must be specified in an IEP. Let's get more into the specifics of what a modification is and what an accommodation is. So let's talk about some examples of accommodations. So for instance, an accommodation might be a change to the environment. For instance, if you have a child who has a wheelchair, but you put all of their classes on a second or third floor of a building and you don't have an elevator, you're going to need to change that. That's an accommodation, right? You might have to change where their classes are located, or you might have to change a seating location. Perhaps you have a child with a vision impairment and they need to sit closer to the blackboard so they can see what's going on in the instruction better. That's an accommodation. Perhaps you can give extra time to accomplish the exact same amount of work that the other students are accomplishing. You're not changing the curriculum, you're not changing what is expected to be learned, but you are changing something in the process of how they're going to do this work or how they're going to access the instruction. So let's move on to modifications. Now, modifications are going to change the curriculum. They're going to change what the child is learning. So for instance, you could reduce the level of difficulty, lower reading level material on the same topic. So if you're teaching 3rd grade and you're doing something in the science area and you're giving everybody this material to read, you might have a student that needs 1st grade level reading. So just finding different levels within the same curriculum, within the same topic, but maybe a lower level material. You could also reduce the amount and focus of an assignment. So you could simplify vocabulary, and instead of maybe having them write a paragraph or an essay, maybe they write outlines. And you can just reduce the amount of work to be completed. So these are different ways in which accommodations and modifications differ, and different examples of how you can change your environment to accommodate your students. So these are just the things we need to be aware of when it comes to what are the rights of children, what are the rights of families, and how do we support them instead of punish them, and how do we change our environment? What's going on in the public schools when it comes to special education, and how do we in Montessori, even if we don't have public funding, how can we also change our environments to accommodate students with special needs. And this brings me to an important point that I learned in some of my classes, and that is the fact that Montessori often has more students with disabilities than public school. So last I checked, and maybe this is outdated, but last I checked, public school, I think per classroom had about 11% inclusion in each classroom of children with special needs, children with disabilities. Montessori could be somewhere around 20%. We're somewhere around double what the public school system has. And there are a lot of reasons why. One reason why is that parents are looking for alternative options. They think, you know what, public school's not working. Let's give Montessori a try. We've heard all these things about Montessori, and maybe this is the ticket. Maybe this is the thing that will help students. And the other reason is because Montessori is already so individualized that we are already on that path to accommodating curriculums to each student's needs. However, as you may have noticed, if you're in the real world and the real teaching environment in Montessori, it's still not easy. We're not special education teachers. There are a lot of things we don't know about how to accommodate or how to modify our classrooms or our expectations of students with special needs. There are a lot of things we don't know about all the different needs of different students. And because we don't receive extra funding, we often don't have the extra resources that public schools have or the extra staff to help accomplish those goals. So this is a really difficult subject. This is a really tricky subject. So I really want to make sure that everybody is aware of what's happening in special education, what the framework is, what does the law say, what are the rights of students, and also how is that not being fulfilled in our modern day society? It seems crazy that we are still having parents being punished for having children with disabilities. And that shouldn't be happening at all in modern society. So I just want us to be aware of that, think critically about that. And if you have any other questions when it comes to this subject, please leave a comment down below or please email me. And this is not a subject I'm an expert on, but I know enough about this to say there are rights here that are being violated and we need to protect that. And also, even if you are a private entity, there are ways to go about your environment to help accommodate or modify your classroom to help students reach their goals. And maybe those goals are different for each child. And in Montessori, we should respect that and understand that. That's part of our training, right? Understanding that each child is unique and that we have to approach their education plan in a unique way. So that's all I have for you today. And I hope this video has been informative. I know it's a little bit different, but I thought it's too important of a subject to leave alone. And I wanted to at least shed some light on the subject so that people have an awareness.